I want to highlight what I thought were the interesting or important parts of Dennis Prager's appearance on the Rubin Report. I want to give the questions I would have asked Dennis Prager during this conversation. I must admit, I was incredulous by some of the things I heard coming from Dennis. The reason why this video even came about was because of Prager's initial video called "If There Is No God, Murder Isn't Wrong," which I'm sure many of you saw. There has been a ton of response videos because of it. Michael Shermer has done a great response video on his Skeptic Magazine's channel and was on the Rubin Report with Dennis. I'll post the links for all these videos in the description box. David Rubin starts the conversation correctly, in my opinion, by stating the crux of the matter, and that is that Prager is a believer and Shermer isn't. And Prager pushes back.
Well, that's not the crux. Forgive me.
Well, take it away.
No, I don't think it is, because I have debated atheists like at Oxford many years ago, and it's in print and it's on the internet, so one could see it. The professor Jonathan Glover, who's an atheist and a professor of moral philosophy, then at Oxford, now at another British university. The first thing he said when we debated was, "I agree with Mr. Prager. If there is no God, ethics are subjective." So, and there are people who believe in God who agree with Michael that it's whether or not there's a God is important, obviously, but still ethics are subjective no matter what. Or you can have objective ethics without God. So the fact that he's not a believer and I am a believer is not fully dispositive here.
Okay. Dennis is admitting here that, number one, you can be a believer in God and say ethics can be either subjective or objective. And number two, you can be a non-believer in God and say ethics are either subjective or objective. My first question to Dennis would be, do you think any person who doesn't base their morality on the Judeo-Christian principles is justified in saying murder is wrong? If the answer is no, then isn't Rubin correct that the crux of the matter is that you do believe in this particular God, and Shermer doesn't? David Rubin then asks Dennis Prager, have you always been a believer?
But the biggest single factor in moving me to believe in God has been the secular foolishness that has permeated our society. I was taught at Columbia, it's a prestigious place, by very bright, secular, often non-believers, and I was taught mostly nonsense. And I remember I went crazy thinking, why is there so much nonsense being taught at an Ivy League university by bright people? Then a phrase from the Bible came into my brain in Hebrew, and it's very well known to people who've studied the Bible. You will know the phrase certainly, and that is, wisdom begins with fear of God. And then I realized, wow, no God, no wisdom. And that has permeated my life. In other words, it is the anti-God crowd that has made me realize how important God is. It's not, God didn't appear to me, the religious have not convinced me. The irreligious have convinced me of the centrality of God to the world.
So that's...
You said that secular foolishness was the biggest single factor in moving you to believe in God. Here's a thought experiment for you, Dennis. If things were to change in the future, and the Judeo-Christian society became more foolish than secular society, will you move towards disbelief in God? If foolishness of secular society moved you into the belief, wouldn't foolishness of the Judeo-Christian society move you out of the belief? I can hear Dennis Prager say, well, no, Doug, that's a bad reason to leave a belief in God based on the foolish actions of Jews or Christians. If that's the case, why is the foolishness of secular society a good reason to move towards God? Dennis, you said a phrase in the Bible came into your mind in Hebrew. Wisdom begins with fear in God. And you realized, wow, no God, no wisdom. But what if a person of a different religion, like Buddhism, saw the same foolishness as you and it reminded them of a quote from Buddha, and it drove them to be more serious about Buddhism. Would you say that was a good reason to become a serious, committed Buddhist?
The question I most want an answer to, or most curious to get an answer to from an atheist, do you hope you're right or do you hope you're wrong?
I don't really hope. I just sort of go along and just try to lead a good life. And
right,
I'm not hoping for anything, really. I mean, if it turned out there's a God.
Yes. Would you be happy? I mean, look, there are undoubtedly people you love in your life. So if there is a God and the traditional belief there's an afterlife, you would reconnect.
Sure,
with
I would be glad about that.
Right.
Of course.
Okay, that's all. Okay, let me tell you why I asked.
If that was the reason, if that was the version.
Do you hope you're right or do you hope you're wrong? I like Shermer's answer here and Rubin's follow-up point, if that's the version of God. Which God or version of God is Dennis asking about? The Christian God? The Jewish God? The Muslim God? One of the Hindu gods? It seems Dennis Prager wants others to hope like he hopes or wish like he wishes. Dennis, does hoping or wishing for an afterlife make it true?
You know what I mean? People.
Well, if God is good, there's an afterlife. If God is an idiot, or God is cruel, or God doesn't give a damn about his creation, then there's no afterlife. But I make only two leaps of faith. It's all I make. That God exists, that God is the creator, and God is good. And if that's the case, then there's an afterlife. That's all. You can't have a good God and this totally unjust world be the only existence. That would be a cruel God.
If God is good, there's an afterlife. If God is cruel, there is no afterlife. Dennis, I want to play a clip from your video, If There Is No God, Murder Isn't Wrong.
But now I will pose a much harder question. How do you know? I'm sure you think murder is wrong, but how do you know?
Now I want to pose a much harder question to you, Dennis. How do you know? I'm sure you think that if there is a good God, there's an afterlife, but how do you know? Do you think it's a good idea to base something as important as morality on leaps of faith, Dennis? Shouldn't we reason and even struggle together to find out how best humans should interact, instead of hoping, wishing, and taking leaps of faith in a God and an afterlife? What do you mean when you say good? When you say good God, what standard of good are you using? Don't you believe that the standard for goodness is your God? Dennis, if your God revealed to you that there is no afterlife, would you now say God is evil? But how can you say God is evil if you define God as being the standard for good? If that is your standard, then whatever your God does or thinks is good, right? Even if your God doesn't want an afterlife for humans. If you base your standard of goodness on your God, you have forfeited any opportunity to judge that God as either good or evil. God is good becomes a tautology. God is God.
I'm curious, I wasn't planning on even asking this, but would you both concede that the other one could be right?
Of course he could be right.
Yeah.
Obviously. I would only say intellectually, this has obviously nothing to do with Michael, whom I have great respect for. Intellectually, I respect agnosticism more than atheism. The certitude that implies, I don't intellectually quite understand. It's like, I don't understand a believer who never has doubts. Mm-hmm. I don't get it. So I don't understand an atheist who never has doubts.
Of course it could be right, obviously. Dennis, are you admitting that you could be wrong here? That the God of the Old Testament may not exist? If so, then that means you could be wrong that the fear of God leads to wisdom, and that you could be wrong about your stance and version of objective morality. Would you be willing to add a tagline in your video that says, if there is no God, there is no objective morality, but I could be wrong about that? Dennis, by admitting you could be wrong about God, some may label you as an agnostic theist, just like Shermer is an agnostic atheist. You're both agnostic because you both admit you could be wrong, and both admit that you don't know it with certainty. But Shermer leads his life like a God or gods don't exist. He lacks belief, therefore he's an atheist. And you live your life like a God does exist. You believe, thus you're a theist.
I intellectually, not emotionally, not religiously, I don't get how someone can look at the universe and think it came about on its own.
I don't get how the universe came about on its own. Is this the real reason you believe in God? Earlier you said the single biggest factor was the foolishness of secular society that drove you to God. But it seems first cause, or the prime mover argument, is very important to your belief in a deity. It sounds like you were saying that you don't understand how our universe came about, therefore you believe in a God. Aren't there countless examples in history where we humans haven't understood something, that we didn't get it, so we assumed a deity as an explanation only to find out later we were wrong in our assumption? Maybe cosmology is the same way.
Now, some cosmologists say that the theory of inflation, which began our understanding of the current universe at least, requires there to be a beginning.
Yeah, they're wrong. I think that, for one thing, there are theorems about what space-time can do. And you take space-time into the past, and number one, you make some assumptions. And number two, under those assumptions, you say that the classical space-time comes to a singularity. But those assumptions might be wrong. That's always a possibility. And classical space-time is not the fundamental answer. We know the world is not classical. We know there is quantum mechanics. No one has a quantum theory of gravity for which there's a theorem that says the universe had to begin. In fact, it is trivial to prove the opposite theorem. If you have a time-dependent quantum state, it is obviously extendable infinitely far into the past.
So,
I fully admit I don't quite understand seeing the universe and concluding that on rational grounds, just rational, logical grounds, this all came from nothing, and that all the design I see implies no designer.
Is it possible that the design you see is not really design? You admitted earlier that you could be wrong about God's existence. Then isn't it possible you are wrong about what you deem as designed? Dennis, how do we determine what is designed and what isn't? Isn't it through comparisons? We compare a watch on the beach with the beach itself and say, this watch was designed. But don't you believe that the beach, the grains of sand, was designed by your God as well? What would you expect a non-designed universe to look like? Would you expect a non-designed universe to be 96% filled with dark matter and dark energy or vast emptiness of space, with only 4% of the known elements contained within it? Would you expect randomness, explosions, and very little life of any sort? Would you expect life on Earth to struggle with heat and cold, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis? Would you expect biological flaws in humans like a ureter running through the prostate gland or an appendix prone to rupture? But isn't that exactly what we see? Dennis, if you haven't considered what a non-designed universe may look like, how can you say it is designed?
But I made the point, though. I said, look, when a child is born with terrible deformity, every believer I know goes, where's God? So when a child is born perfectly formed, why doesn't the atheist go, wow, that it doesn't seem that it's completely random.
Well, not random. It's still a wow moment for all of us.
Well, no, wow, but it's a random wow.
Not random.
Well, it's either design or random.
No.
Christians and Jews, I think some of you get frustrated when you hear an unbeliever mischaracterize the Bible. Well, I think Michael Shermer and people like me are a little frustrated at Dennis Prager right now when we hear him say that it's either designed or random. The birth of a healthy baby is the summation of billions of years of natural selection, Dennis. Mutations are random, but the process of life evolving through natural selection via traits that are beneficial to life, this is not random. If you don't believe in evolution via common descent, I encourage you to talk to your God-fearing friends at biologos.org and they can explain it to you. Dennis, if it's true that there isn't this dichotomy between design and randomness, that those are not the choices that you proposed, would that have any impact on your God belief?
Multiple universe?
Yeah.
The multiple universe is a cop-out.
No.
Because he knows better than I, because he knows more science than I. You cannot possibly ever. It's not possible for us to have contact or prove another universe. So it's a statement made that has less argument for it than the belief in God.
Yeah, well, I don't think you said it was provable, but
no, he didn't say it. But
yeah.
but even offering it as an argument, if that's your argument, then I have a good sound argument.
The multiverse is a cop-out because you can't possibly prove another universe. If that's your argument, then I have a good sound argument, says Dennis. Are you admitting that because your God can't be proved, that your argument is as good or better than the multiverse theory? If the multiverse is a cop-out explanation, why isn't your God hypothesis a cop-out explanation? For Dennis, it is more coherent to say that a God outside of space and time created our universe. But in the multiverse hypothesis, the other universes are also outside of space and time, meaning outside our space and outside our time. But should we not have the humility to say, I don't know? Is there something wrong with saying, I don't know how our universe started or what happened before the Big Bang?
Both of us end up at an epistemological wall where we can't go any further. And then now we're just using words. Well, God is that which does not need to be created and is outside of space and time. Okay, these are just words we're using. You don't know that.
No, I don't
Any
know
more than
that,
I know
but it
for
makes
sure.
more sense.
I am glad Dennis says, I don't know, on the beginning of the universe. Dennis, would you agree that what makes more sense to you is not a good way of coming to beliefs, especially in the field of cosmology? It used to make sense to humans that the Earth was flat, and unfortunately it still does for many.
I think everyone can understand, and I'm not saying this in a condescending way, that if you don't agree with me, you're not on my level of understanding, but I think it's axiomatic that you can't learn morality from nature.
Dennis, let's say you're walking along the street and you see one guy pull out a knife and stab another guy and then run away. You would think, oh my, that's terrible. I just witnessed a murder. But then as you approach the motionless body, you realize there's no blood and you think, this is strange. Oh well, maybe the knife cauterized the wound somehow, or it didn't puncture any arteries or veins. You give your report to the police and go home. The next day you learn on the news that the person stabbed after being observed in the hospital was an advanced robot. So advanced, in fact, that people have a really hard time telling the difference between it and humans without advanced scientific testing. But after running tests, opening the body up, it became clear to the doctors that this indeed was not a human person. Would you still say you observed a murder? Of course not. The material facts, the facts of nature, is now leading you to change your moral conclusion from murder to merely damaging a property. In this sense, Dennis, do you agree that there are facts of nature that guide us humans in coming up with our conclusions of what's wrong and what's right?
You need a mind, and you need, I believe, an outside source to say this is what is right, this is what is wrong, because science doesn't tell you that. That's all. I don't even think that's debatable. How do I know not to steal because of atoms or biology?
Dennis, if I removed all biological functions and 99% of the atoms from within your skull area, would you still know that stealing is wrong? Dennis, could you know right from wrong, in fact, know anything at all without atoms and biology? Isn't it possible that just as a child learns right from wrong as it develops, humans have learned right and wrong through time and evolution, where morality itself evolves? If morality came from your God, wouldn't you expect morality to be unchanging? If morality came from evolution, wouldn't you expect it to change and adapt? What do we see throughout history, Dennis? A constant fixed morality or a morality that changes?
Your video opened up, is murder wrong? Okay, what is murder? Let's define some terms here to get us some clarification. Murder is the wrongful killing of one human by another. So it's like asking, is wrong wrong? Yes, it's right there in the word. So maybe we mean, is killing wrong?
No, we meant is murder. I meant is murder wrong.
Well, by definition, it's wrong. It's
right.
It's like
yes,
asking,
by definition.
Right.
But that's not the issue. My video is not is why is murder wrong? not whether it is wrong.
Yeah.
Why is it wrong?
Yeah, why is it wrong? Because we've defined it that way.
Okay, but so that's my argument.
Yes, but
My argument is that's the whole point. If we've defined it that way, then we are God, and we could say murder blacks, murder Jews, murder gays, right?
no.
Dennis is saying that if humans alone define murder as wrong, then someday humans may define murder to exclude blacks or Jews or gays, and therefore we need an outside mind to tell us what is right and wrong. Dennis, was it murder or killing when Yahweh commanded the killing of the Amalekites in the Old Testament? Was it murder or killing when Yahweh told the Israelites to stone the practicing homosexual or the rebellious son? If it's your God doing the defining of the term murder, maybe we should pick a different God. Dennis, do you believe in the God of the Old Testament? Well, that's correct, Doug. Do you believe that you could have chosen out of your own free will to serve or worship or fear a different God? Well, yeah, I guess so. So didn't you choose which God your morality would be based on? Yes, I guess that's right, Doug. In your opinion, did you choose the right God? Yes, of course. All the other gods don't even exist. Dennis, you say that if there is no God, then the definition of murder is just a matter of human opinion and humans take the place of God. But in your opinion, you freely chose one God out of the many gods on which your morality is based. So haven't you also become the God in your life in choosing which God to base your morality on? I think Shermer does a great job talking about divine command theory in his response video to Prager. You ask, why is murder wrong? And your answer is because your God said so. But now you're left with asking a second question. How do you know when murder is murder? In your God's eyes. Don't you believe that Yahweh sanctioned the killing of humans in some cases in the past and can do so again in the future? When does murder become justice in the eyes of your God?
Because I wish it worked. Because my bottom line is I just want people to do good.
Yes.
If atheists, okay. I'm much closer to a good atheist than a bad religious person.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis says, I just want people to do good. If you saw evidence that a higher percentage of non-Judeo-Christian societies had a significantly lower rate of murder compared to Judeo-Christian societies, would you espouse those moral frameworks if all you want is people to do good?
Go back. How do you know that murder is wrong from the divine command theory, your perspective? I mean, you said you don't talk to God, you're not...
Right, I believe in revelation. I do believe the Ten Commandments were revealed.
Dennis, you say that you believe God revealed the Ten Commandments, but do you know the Ten Commandments were revealed by a God? It sounds like you're not confident enough to say that you know that they were revealed, but why do you believe they were? What's more likely, that an all-powerful God revealed it to man, or men just wrote down moral principles that they already knew and believed?
If God is just declaring things randomly, then if he didn't say murder was wrong, would that make it okay?
Well, to be consistent, it would be, but he didn't do that, so it's irrelevant.
Shermer asks, if God didn't reveal that murder is wrong, would that mean it wouldn't be wrong? Dennis answers, yes, murder wouldn't be objectively wrong if God didn't reveal it. I want believers in the Judeo-Christian God to really think about that. Dennis Prager is saying the only reason murder is objectively wrong is because God said so. And if he didn't say so, it wouldn't be objectively wrong. My hypothesis is that your intuitions are screaming right now because humans have evolved to have this knee-jerk reaction against murder or wrongful killing. Dennis, Homo sapiens have been on this planet for about 100,000 years. And the Ten Commandments came when? Maybe 4,000 years ago? So are you saying for 97,000 years it wasn't objectively wrong to murder?
Not the issue. Remember, my issue is beyond what we're speaking about. There is no, forgetting murder for a moment, there is no good and evil if there is no God. There are only opinions about good and evil, just like beauty.
In fact, Dennis, science has shown that beauty is objective. There is no good or evil if there is no God. There is only opinions of what is good and evil. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, an opinion is a view, a judgment, or appraisal formed in the mind about a particular matter. Dennis, aren't you basing good and evil on your God's opinion? If your God wanted to directly cause the worst possible suffering on all of humanity, starting tomorrow for 3 hours, would you say that is good or evil? Well, my God would never do that, Doug. How do you know, Dennis? Maybe your God wants to do it for reasons higher than yours. In this next clip, in my opinion, Shermer is at his finest in this discussion when he talks about how morality has evolved in higher primates and how it can be objective.
Okay, but what do you mean by objective?
Objective, that it has just this, objectively, this cup, this glass exists.
So it's not just
it's not
your
my
opinion
opinion.
and my opinion. That's
correct.
Right. Okay, so I think moral values actually have a factual basis that are like the glass, a little more complicated, but based on our human nature. So you mentioned the selfish gene. We do have our inner demons that cause us to want to be selfish and greedy and avarice and so forth. But we also have our better angels. That is, it pays to be cooperative, nice, altruistic, and caring and loving for other human beings, particularly those in your tribe. And it benefits your selfish genes to be nice to other people. Now, immediately in your immediate family, extended family, and your community, and studies show this does pay off. Now, unfortunately, we're very tribal to other people who may be threatening our empathetic notions about our fellow beings. But that's an evolved characteristic. We can see it in primates, in children, and so on. There's a deep sense from the moment you're born of there's a right and a wrong. And that comes from this evolved propensity to survive in a social community. You can't survive by murdering, cheating, lying, and so forth. And so that's where it comes from. And I consider that to be transcendent of you and me. It's not my opinion, it's not your opinion. It belongs to the species. We're born that way. Lions don't have that. Chimps don't quite have that like we have it, and so on. There's a scale of this.
Dennis, if you view morality as something that has evolved, it has a great deal of explanatory power. For example, if I asked you to destroy each of these 5 things one at a time, which one would you feel the most guilt? Which one the least? Shermer mentioned the inner angels and demons in all of us. Could you order your guilt from lowest to highest? My guess is you could. Most people would answer rock, then leaf, then butterfly, hamster, and finally dolphin, from least to the most guilt. Evolution explains this, why we tend to value species based on our closeness to our own species. Yahweh has no explanatory power to these types of questions. In the next clip, Shermer talks about how morality and concepts like fairness have evolved in higher primates. Then Dennis responds.
One of my favorite videos from Franz de Waal is the 2 little capuchin monkeys that are each taught to swap a pebble for a grape or a cucumber slice. So the pebbles are like money. So so you see this video where the experimenter gives the one a pebble, he gives it back, and he gets a cucumber slice, he eats it, he's happy. Then the other one does the same thing, and he gets a grape. Now, they like grapes better than cucumbers, because who doesn't? And so the other one, the first one, sees that. He goes, oh boy, I'm going to get a grape. And he runs and gets his pebble, and he puts the pebble, and the experimenter gives a cucumber slice, and he's like, and you see him, and he throws it at the experimenter. He's pounding on the cage. He's rattling the cage wall. He is pissed because that guy got something I didn't get. That was not right. I did the same amount of work that he did, and he got something. So you can see that sense. They don't have language. They can't call it anything, but they have a sense of wrong. I was wrong. That was not fair.
Okay, so let me respond.
Yeah.
That experiment does not show what you just said. That experiment shows that he's pissed on his behalf. You find me one monkey on the face of the earth that rattles the cage because the other guy was wronged, then I will take that argument seriously.
Actually,
this is completely selfish based. Number 2, you mentioned children. So you have raised...
No, not okay. Yes, it is selfish based, but it's about what's right and wrong. What's fair.
For me. No.
Right.
So it's not about right and wrong. It's about me. I feel gypped. That doesn't count.
But
they don't rattle cages on behalf of other monkeys.
No, it's a sense of fairness. Like, I want what's right for me.
Yes, for me.
And then, okay,
but I don't want what's right for you, fair for you.
So what does it take for us to scale up for me to care about what's right for me, to care about what's right for you?
It takes transcendent morality. It
Dennis said that the monkey doesn't care about what is right for the other monkey. If a mammal did care about what is right or fair for another and showed empathy, would you admit that things like empathy, fairness, and morality might be evolutionary based? Here's an example not with monkeys, but with rats. In this experiment, not only will rats help their mates, but they do so instead of taking a treat. Rats will save their friend before eating a treat for themselves. Dennis, doesn't this show things like empathy and fairness in mammals like rats?
Black and white, they're all good or they're all evil. No,
but don't say we can learn that we have this great built-in sense. Why did the world stink?
Okay, read Paul
The world
Bloom's
is
book.
filled. Why is slavery universal? Rape universal? Murder universal?
Well, we know
goodness is rarer than all of these terrible things.
But
why does the world stink? Why is slavery universal, rape universal? Maybe because Yahweh didn't specifically say it was objectively wrong like he did for murder? And it seems that even though Yahweh said murder is wrong, it seems it didn't help change human behavior in regards to universal murder. Yes, Dennis, us humans can be stink pickles at times, but we also can show love, empathy, kindness to others, even when no one's watching. Homo sapiens have both good and bad behaviors just like other primates. And are you sure goodness is rarer than slavery, rape, and murder? In my opinion, people with Judeo-Christian values see people as fundamentally bad, whereas people like me and Shermer see people as flawed but fundamentally good. Shermer argues just after this that people's ethics are getting better because of reason and the Enlightenment.
God demands that I be good is the single most animating thing in my life. And I want it to be the most animating thing in everybody's life. I don't trust people who listen to their inner voice. A handful of occasions it will work. For the vast majority of people, the inner voice will be, if a young man can get away with grabbing a woman, the inner voice will be dwarfed by his testosterone.
So, all right.
Dennis says if a young man can get away with grabbing a woman, the inner voice will be dwarfed by his testosterone. Now, I will pose a much harder question to you, Dennis. How do you know? I'm sure you think a young man's inner voice will be dwarfed by his testosterone, but how do you know? Do you have any data to suggest that the vast majority of young men would grab a woman inappropriately if they could get away with it? Is there anything that would change your mind on this claim? And Dennis, why do you think testosterone can override the inner voice in the vast majority of young men, but testosterone doesn't override words in a holy book?
To my earlier point, how do you know? So you said Revelation, but you mean the Bible, the Old Testament. Okay, so but other religious leaders, like the leader of ISIS, Baghdadi. So he says, I get revelation from God. I know what's right and wrong.
Right. So I have an answer to that. Yeah. I have an answer, and I'm curious to hear your answer, because I've heard this a lot, and it's a plausible argument. How do you know which God, for example? Okay, if I came along and I developed a brown bubbly drink and said this is Coca-Cola. And you would say, well, there really is a real Coca-Cola. You are making up something new, well beyond, chronologically, the original Coca-Cola. It's your recipe. It doesn't taste like it. It doesn't look like it. And you don't have the same ingredients, but you're calling it Coca-Cola. God was introduced to humanity by the Old Testament. That everybody acknowledges. All right? That's the God I'm talking about. If there are variations on that theme, that's their business. There is a Coca-Cola. And I'm talking about Coca-Cola. I'm talking about the God given to humanity through the Old Testament. That God gave the Ten Commandments, in my view, and that made murder absolutely wrong, not dependent upon personal or societal opinion.
Shermer asked Dennis, how do you know your morality comes from God? And he said, through revelation. But other religions have revelation. How do you know you have the right revelation? Dennis's answer is basically saying, Well, my religion was first, and the rest are derivations of the Old Testament. Dennis, if you became convinced that the Old Testament is not the original Coca-Cola, would you say that the Ten Commandments were not direct revelation from a God? Spoiler alert, the Old Testament is not the original Coca-Cola. The Sumerians and even Hinduism predates Old Testament writings. But even if the Old Testament is the original Coca-Cola, does being first make revelation true? Dennis, how do you tell the difference between a false revelation and a true one? For the rest of the talk, Shermer and Prager go into the politics of religion and morality. Shermer does a great job on talking about the social experiment by using laws and changing laws to experiment on what raises human flourishing and well-being in a society. But I think the meat of the conversation was in the first 40 minutes or so.